Today we've got John Cooper from Skillet. Super excited for this, John. Skillet's been a band I've known about for a very, very long time. You guys have been around the block for a while now. So I'm super excited to chat with you. Before we get into all the things that we're going to talk about with the new album and everything, I just want to know, like, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing good. Thanks. I'm glad that you've known for Skillet. We've been around for a long time and absolutely thrilled we're still playing music. Never dreamt it'd last this long. We're approaching 30 years here, which is just, it's absolutely crazy. And, but we're doing good. We're on the road. We're about halfway through a tour now with Seether and Tim Montana and Royal Lynn is the opener and having a great time. Everybody's happy. Everybody's healthy.
What a fun lineup too. That's great to see. You were talking about how you're coming up on 30 years here and everything. In fact, Skillet was the very first show I ever saw as a young lad. I was still in elementary school, and my sister took me to the Watertown, South Dakota Civic Center, and I saw Alien Youth put on. And had a blast. And then Collide quickly became one of my all-time favorite records, shortly after that. And man, what a ride you guys have been on for all these years, right?
Wow. Alien Youth, that brings me back, man. Had the blonde hair.
You should bring that back. That's what you should bring back.
It's kind of coming back in style now, isn't it? You know, it's been long enough that people are like, "Oh, it doesn't look that weird." Anyway, but yeah, that was a great. I mean, that really was a great time in music, though. I mean, the late '90s had a lot of really, in my opinion, exciting bands happening. You know, you had the industrial movement, which I was a big fan of, whether it's, you had Manson, of course you already had 9 Inch, but it began to branch out with Manson and the time White Zombie and then Rob Zombie around the late 90s, was where Rob Zombie had his own solo records. But that was a really cool time. And then you also had the explosion of Linkin Park, in 98 probably or 99. I can't remember when. And so just like a lot of things changing so quickly, it was just a really good time for rock music. And then by the time I saw you on that tour in Alien Youth, that's probably 2001 or 2. That's right around when we were about to get Evanescence and some of those really big, not new metal, but
kind of alternative
modern rock. I would call it modern rock. Or Breaking Benjamin was right around that time. 3 Days Grace first record was 03, I believe, or 02. I can't remember. So anyway, walk down memory lane. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I remember. For me. I remember, seeing that, seeing you all get ready, sound checking and everything in Watertown, and I think that was 2001 if I remember right.
I think so, yeah.
And I just remember seeing the hair, the piercings, I remember at the time you had these big, I think the girls were wearing the big platform kind of boots and everything. And growing up in Watertown, I had never seen anybody dressed like that in my life.
And I remember
going to the sound check, and then because my dad brought me in, I think some local church people were helping you out with the sound check stuff. And I remember my dad bringing me in, and he was like, "Do you want to actually go to the concert later?" And I was like, I'll pass on this. I was only 7 years old, and I'm like, I just haven't seen anybody ever look like this before in my life.
That's true. That was very true. It was an unusual era, and but it was a lot of fun. Those are good memories, and we did that. So from 96 to 2006 we were still just trying to make it work. Collide was our first, I think, breakthrough album, which actually you just mentioned, Single Call. That was 2003. That was when we kind of began to break in, and we began doing more mainstream stuff. We toured with Saliva on that record, and that kind of changed the game. But it was still another, 3 more years until we had a hit record. It was. That first 10 years wasn't easy, man.
Yeah, for sure. You were in the struggle part of the career, which is oftentimes when the best memories are made, though, right?
Well, it definitely makes you who you are. I mean, even on Collide, actually, even when Comatose came out. So for people that don't know, Comatose was our 2006 release. So that was 10 years into our career, our 5th album. That was our first big album. It was a gold selling record. We did not have any radio hits, but it was just a lot of word of mouth. Everything was clicking. But even on that album, I mean, I was still selling my own merchandise. I was our merchandise manager. I was setting it up. I was training people to sell it. I was driving the bus at night because we couldn't afford a bus driver. I had two little kids, and we couldn't afford. It was just, you just got to do what you got to do. But yeah, it makes you who you are. And then when things go good, in my opinion, you're very thankful for
Yeah.
it, because you put that hard work in. So it's very rewarding, and also it just kind of keeps you. People sometimes say, "Man, when you sold 20 million records, how do you keep humble? How do you're like, oh, dude, if you had any idea how long it
Right.
took and how much work, how many people told us that we sucked before we sold 1 million records, you just kind of, yeah." And how many people still tell us we suck even after we sold 1 million records? You just kind of get to where you're thankful for what you have, and you realize that your success is not measured by record sales or what somebody on social
Yeah.
media says about you, good or bad. You don't believe the hype. You don't believe the negativity. You don't believe the hate either. You just know who you are, and you do your job, and you do the best you can, and you stay humble.
Love it.
Love it.
Love it. Well, John, I want to be like kind of upfront, honest with you. So obviously I mentioned like, I grew up, going to church, growing up in that world. And obviously even saw you when I was younger, and got to a point in my life.
Or didn't see
Well,
us
that's
when you were
true. That's
younger
true.
because
I
you were
saw
too
you
late.
sound check when I was younger. Saw you sound check. But yeah, a lot of things in my life changed throughout, especially around my faith. And so like I learned a lot more about myself. I learned a lot more about like theology and the Bible when I went to Bible college, and then I ended up going to seminary. And so things have really changed for me, like ever since I was like that very kind of conservative, what we would describe as like an evangelical kind of youth group. And so even though I'm like still very much a Christian, I would probably maybe in a lot of ways, like I think I'm probably a lot of the kind of person maybe like maybe yourself or other people would say like, hey, I don't know about that. Like that seems to be the kind of Christian that we're wanting to push up against. That seems to be like the kind of Christian that's like, making America not as good of a nation as it could be, like that kind of thing. So I just wanted to be like upfront, and I just wanted to kind of hear you out of like kind of where you're coming from, especially with this new album. I was listening to some of the new songs on it, have read a few of the new interviews that you've done on it. And I just want to kind of get to a point where I'm just hearing you out, even though like probably in a lot of ways we totally disagree on like a million different things. And so, yeah, I just
Right.
want to hear kind of, maybe like first, I saw one of the things about this new album, obviously being called Revolution, is you've described it not as necessarily like a political revolution, but a revolution for love, and specifically around like Jesus's words around like loving your enemies. And so I'm just kind of curious, like obviously to love an enemy means that you have to have maybe some sort of enemy. So I'm just curious, like who would maybe you think of as being like your enemy that you're trying to love?
Mm. Yeah, great. Thanks for the explanation there. I appreciate it. And I love these kind of talks. So I just want to, you did say correctly, but I want even a
Yeah,
little more nuance if I
Sure.
can. So the record's called Revolution, and it is in no way about politics. It's not a political revolution that I'm talking about. It is a revolution of, I might even call it a spiritual revolution, revolution of love. I think that's good too. And part of that to me is more about loving neighbors, loving people that don't love you back. So I wouldn't say necessarily like, hey, I have enemy. The In other words, enemies is So let's say that I get my phone and I post, hey, new record, and somebody comes on, they're like, I hate you, and this, that, and the other. I wouldn't say they're my enemy, but we are in sort of a conflict. And so rather than repay this person back with a, well, screw you too,
right.
or whatever, it's more of a repaying negativity with kindness, those kind of, not meeting the reaction with a level of hatred or what have you, that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily saying that there are specific enemies, but obviously we do have those kind of conflicts, and we need to do that. Part of the revolution of love that I'm talking about is also specifically we have a song called Revolution. It's the title track, obviously, and the first line of the song says, "Lost the future generation face to face, can't communicate, can't tell the truth from faking. Some of this is really just about the fact that I love teenagers in general. I love kids. I just have a heart for kids, but teenagers, my mom died from cancer when I was 14. I entered a very dark period in my life fighting with my dad. And maybe if we can just get raw for a second, I used to sort of, to the degree that I would like fantasize about maybe hurting my dad or hurting other people that were not so nice to me. In other words, not repaying with love and thinking, well, what happens if my dad did do this? What would I do? And I'm just being honest. I would have some sort of fantasies about what that would be. And that is about a pretty dark thing to admit. Jesus saved me from those things, which is part of my testimony. So I have a heart for people struggling with depression, suicidal thoughts, being bullied at school or wherever, or online now. Of course, I didn't have online when I was a kid. There was no such thing.
Thank God, right?
And so, oh God, thank God. The internet, it's good and it's bad, right? We can use it for good or you can use it for evil. So I guess what I'm saying is part of the song revolution is specifically singing this, the highest rates of suicide recorded in American history right now, the highest levels of depression, the amount of kids that are medicated, even legally so. I mean, just medication. Everybody's medicated. And I meet these kids at shows and my heart just goes out to them, So some of this is also saying to some of these young people, hey, you're bullied at school, you go home. Now you're bullied online too. You can't get away from it. Who cares what these people say? Just don't go online. Do yourself a favor. Don't go online. But if you do, who cares what they say? They don't own you. They can't speak evil over you. They can't speak death over you. Who cares what these people say? And I talk a lot about that on my social media and things. So I think that the overwhelming message of the album is those kind of things. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what I mean when I say a revolution of love. That's sort of the definition there.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I mean, certainly, I think that's absolutely part of the album. And then I do wonder, you mentioned, obviously you don't personally feel like this is like a very political kind of revolution, but you've got lyrics around faith, family, and freedom, which I do think those words, especially connected, can anybody listening to a song like that in these days in this kind of political climate would think of that as just by saying those words together does seem like to be a political statement. Do you feel like that way at all? When you're talking about your faith, your family, your freedom, and putting that all together, would you say that even if you're not trying to make it a political statement, do you see how it maybe could be perceived as a political statement?
Oh, yeah. I think that's absolutely fair. And I don't mind that at all. Don't shy away from that. So I would say, yeah, absolutely agree. And the reason I appreciate that and the reason I'm trying to answer it so honestly is one of the things I don't like about what's going on is I don't like it when people are dancing constantly, meaning dancing around the truth. If you're like, oh yeah, I can see that, and that's that, and then you can meet with common ground on things. Absolutely, I can see why somebody would say that. My faith, my family, my freedom sounds a little bit like Americanish. Right. That sounds a little pro-America.
I'll be honest, it's been stuck in my head all weekend. So
good. But yeah, I would say absolutely, it is pro-America. And so for me, I think some of it just depends on also what people mean when they say political. So in other words, for me to say something that is pro-America, I don't mind if somebody says it kind of sounds political. I would say that's it's more political philosophy than partisan. Maybe that's the way that I would say it. I don't think of it as a partisan message. Now, if you were to say, yeah, John, but don't you agree that it sounds a little bit more like the right than the left? I would say, yes, it does, sadly, in my opinion, because in my experience growing up, the Democrat Party was not against. In fact, I think, from my opinion, it used to be more the left that was more pro freedom of speech than the right was when I was growing up. And there's been some shifts in some of those things, and that's probably a whole other podcast, which I don't even really necessarily care to get into. But in other words, if somebody took that and said, well, it kind of sounds like you're saying you're against censorship and that's a right-wing thing, I would be like, well, that's fine with me. I am against censorship. I'm very kind of nearly absolutist when it comes to that. So I would just say, to me, it's not partisan, but if somebody took it that way, I would say, yeah, I'm just standing on the principles I believe. I believe the government doesn't have the right to tell me how to raise my kids. I think that constitutionally is just wrong. And I would say the same to, to somebody that disagrees with me about a lot of stuff. I always tell people, you can make fun of my God on my social media page. You can make fun of me. You can say anything you want against Jesus. I'm not going to go on and take your comments
Right.
down because I'm a big freedom of speech guy.
I totally get that. And I think both, like, I mean, again, like, however other people would maybe even like think of me like politically, I think Cullen and I both like would very much agree that like we're very much like pro freedom of speech. And so
100%.
you're definitely not going to get any pushback around like freedom of speech in particular on a podcast like this. We're
Yeah.
definitely much more really caring about that, now that doesn't necessarily mean that we try to promote everything, but we definitely don't think that
Oh,
somebody
of
should be
course. Yeah.
thrown in jail because of what they believe or what they say,
Right.
even if we believe that what they say is wrong or
Yes.
whatever.
Absolutely. Yep. I feel you on that. That makes good sense
Yeah,
to
Love
me.
that.
With your faith being such a large part of your identity, the modern day church has kind of moved in a different direction, and the progressive world is very different from the conservative world, and maybe what's considered the traditional American church. I'm curious where you think it's going, and whether or not you think it's a positive or negative, or what you would like to see in comparison to what's maybe
Mm,
going on now.
sure. I just would like to understand a little more clearly what you mean. I'm happy to answer it, though. Maybe explain to me when you say the modern church is going in a different direction.
Yeah, so definitely, I would say like more interested in some of the buzzwords that are of the day. Inclusive communities and racial
Okay,
justice,
like,
things of like
got
that
it.
sort.
Social
Yeah,
justice,
yeah, yeah,
etc. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
You're good.
sorry. The reason I said that is because sometimes when people say the church is going whatever, they actually mean the
Oh,
opposite.
I see what you mean.
It's almost like depending
Right.
on which way you go, depending on what the moderator means. Yeah, it does seem like there's a definite bifurcation in the American church right now, and it's interesting because the Catholic Church is growing really. I'm not Catholic. I've got Catholic friends, of course, but the Catholic Church seems to be growing in some instances because there's a lot of people, even in some cases, leaving the more evangelical world, going to Catholicism because it's more
Yeah,
traditional, and they're looking for something more maybe rooted in history, or they're feeling the upheaval of the times and maybe the waves of how fast things are changing, and maybe they feel like they're hypothetically Baptist church or whatever. They're like, I don't like that they're changing with the times. I'm going Catholic. they're, it's a funny thing to see. I've got a really good friend that, I'm sorry. This is a music podcast, so of course, Lacey
yeah,
Right.
Sturm from Flyleaf is a really good friend of mine. She's gone Orthodox, which is a
Hmm.
similar kind of path that we're talking about, which I don't think she would mind me saying. I think that's
yeah,
common knowledge. I sure hope I didn't say anything I wasn't supposed to say. So anyway, the point is that there is a bifurcation, and I think a group of churches are more going, hey, we need to get back to our roots. We need to be more rooted in history because of the upheaval. You definitely are also having a new progressive wing that is more concerned about social justice and things like that. So how do I feel about it? I would just say it's probably such a long conversation. I'm trying to think of how I could say it
sure.
very quickly. I believe I know I don't look traditional, even though I might look more traditional than I did in
Yeah, I
2001
was
when you
about to
first
This
saw
is
say.
me.
true.
Maybe I'm not really sure. Maybe that comes with age. I'm not, but but I am kind of quite traditional when it comes to theology, and I think that is good for the world. I think that the kind of to me, we're in a very postmodern time period, and so the relativisms of the day, in my view, are creating a lot of instability and confusion in people's lives to where they don't know Maybe I'll give you an
Sure.
example. I don't know why this just popped in my head. I've literally never said this on a podcast, so hopefully nobody's offended. I remember, so I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee has a large percentage of Black people, and so I grew up with a lot of Black people. When I went to University of Memphis, I remember I'll be on college campus. So this is around 1993 or four. And I remember saying something. I said, "Well, it depends on because whites tend to think this." And I said, "I understand something." I said something about blacks, and a white liberal went off on me so hard. How dare you use the word blacks? They're called African Americans, you racist. And I was like, what? I've never heard this before. I've grown up in Memphis and all of my Black friends call themselves Black. I've never heard this. I'm obviously not trying to say anything rude. I wouldn't say something rude and just went off on me. And I remember that feeling of like, this is so unjust. There's such a better way for you to tell me that in your opinion, white friend of mine, that Black people want to be called something different, but I don't mind changing my vocabulary, And I remember in 2020 watching a podcast. I can't remember. There's some podcast. I think he's a former NFL football player. Maybe he's a football player now. He's a Christian, but he's definitely more like on the progressive left. And somebody had asked him, he's Black, and they said, how should whites refer to Black people? Should we call them Black or should we call them African American? And he said, no, don't call us all African American because some of us come from Haiti and some of us come. He's like that's not good. And I was like, I knew it.
You're ahead of the times.
But
Once
these
again.
things, I knew it. But the point being is that I think most people are fine to call people what they want to be called because we don't mean anything by it's the ever shifting rules that make people live in a frustrated period to where I just feel like I'm not talking in good faith to people, and it's really stressful. So I think that because of that, I'm very much into traditional church. Now I'm actually charismatic, funny enough. So people came to my church, they probably wouldn't think it was that traditional church because we jump and go crazy and we're as charismatic as they get. And but so that's that. But there is a wave of social justice happening. I guess that's what I would say is that I think that there are things that traditional churches need to hear. We need to listen to people when it comes to other people's. They say, "Hey, this is what's going on." And the church never did what was right when it came to slavery, when it came to redlining, when it came to marching with MLK. They can list the things off. And I think people like me should be like, that's totally fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. So what are we supposed to be doing now? Of course, what is biblical and what are we supposed to be doing? And I wouldn't say it's totally fair because I still would say that the abolitionist movement still was started by Christian people. And William Wilberforce, of course, was a Christian in the UK, which was at the beginning of outlawing slavery. So I wouldn't say that no one did, but you're absolutely right. We miss a lot of things because we're broken people and we do a bunch of stupid stuff. But I still want to live out the word of God according to how it is. I understand not everybody wants to do that. Love you for free, but that's what I believe.
So
like
you're saying like, and I think it's a great point. Like,
Yeah.
there were Christians that were obviously abolitionists back then, and there were obviously Christians who
John
were
Brown,
supported
perfect
slavery, right?
example.
Like the Southern
Yeah.
Baptist Convention literally was started in order to defend slavery. There's a reason why
Right.
it's Southern Baptist Convention, and then the Northern Baptists were separated from it, right? Like that's a whole history, right? So there were both Christians that were on both sides, right? Just in the same way that we have Christians on multiple different sides of lots of different things. One of the things that I think that was really interesting you mentioned just a second ago is that uh, there's lots of things maybe that even more traditional churches maybe could learn from, like from people that from others, maybe specifically Christians that maybe disagree with them. I'm just curious, like maybe there's like maybe some specific examples of what that could even be, right? Like think of putting yourself back in like the 1960s. You could maybe say that the more traditional churches down in the white South would say you would like them to say, yeah, maybe we could learn a few things about like what the civil rights movement and all of that, right? So I'm just curious, like, what could you even think, maybe, or imagine what the maybe more traditional Christians that maybe you would, maybe for yourself personally, or even if you want to kind of represent more traditional Christians, maybe what are some of those things that maybe they could learn from maybe some of the more progressive type of Christians?
That's a great question. I mean, I will be the first to admit, I honestly don't mind admitting at all, that I don't always do a good job of reaching out to people. Now, in my personal life, actually, I do. So let me rewind. Let me start over. In my personal life, I do a good job of reaching out to people. And one of the things I don't talk a lot about, just because I'm always, I don't know, I don't like talking about myself and what I think I'm doing well, because it just feels like
Yeah, we're not
weird.
supposed to
But
like that. Yeah, you're right.
yeah, right. But you know what? I was talking with somebody recently. I said, what you got to realize is that Skillet is actually an extremely inclusive band. Most people don't know that. I mean, 85% of Skillet's income for the last 15 years has all been in mainstream rock. We hardly do any Christian shows anymore. We do some festivals. We do. I'm not saying we never do, but I would say literally 85% is just playing with rock bands. And most of the bands I tour with are not Christians, do not believe what I believe about lots and lots of things. They're my good friends. And we have meals together. And my kids grew up with them on the road and they're friends. And they still keep in contact today, and we live life together. And to my knowledge, none of these people have ever felt judged by me, or that I said, because you think A, B, or C, I don't want you around my family. That has never even been even a consideration. In my view, it's the opposite of the message of Christ, of how I'm supposed to be treating people. So I think that I'm pretty good when it comes to that. Sometimes when it comes to maybe the online debate or the ideological debate, I can just be like straight on. No, these are the statistics. It's this and it's this. And because of this, you're wrong. And then what people can sometimes say is, don't throw statistics at me. This is what I went through, man. The cop pulled me over because I'm black, and because this and this and this. And in my personal conversations, which I have had that conversation with black friends of mine, I never say to them, I don't believe you, because the statistics
Right.
say. I've never done that in a personal conversation. I think what can happen is that we in churches, sometimes we're ready for the ideological debate and we don't treat it like we're talking to people. I am the worst at that. I will admit it on the front end. I'm getting better. God's helping me get better at that, because that's what it means to love people. So if you were saying some of the things that we could do, I think it would be something like this. And I'm not saying nobody does this. I'm talking about me. All right. Me, my church.
Sure.
How's that?
Yeah.
Me and mine. We got to be better at saying, I love America. I think America is the greatest nation on planet Earth. I've traveled most of the
Amen.
world now, and I've seen what the world has to offer. This country is awesome. Does that mean that I can't say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe how much we blew it in slavery? How much we blew it when churches would not support Martin Luther King as he's preaching a message of nonviolence? I've said my whole life, because I'm a big Martin Luther King fan. I know for sure if I was alive in the 60s, I would have been a Malcolm X guy. I don't think I would have been an MLK guy, because I don't think I have it in me. I think I would be like, you know what? Not to get on a tangent, but I'd be like, I don't need the white man. I don't need you to help me. We're going to help ourselves. And you know what? What you're doing is so wrong. This demands a reckoning here. I think I would have been that way. MLK's message blows me away. It really does. So not to go on a tangent in that.
Including
but
his socialism, by
if
the
we
way.
can just say, I do not like his socialism, but I understand his socialism because, well, that's a whole other thing. I don't know. I am anti-socialism, which I'm assuming is what you mean by that. I'm pro-capitalism, but I do think that capitalism has a really sinful side to it. I think you can be godly and in the system, or you can just be a system for greed, which it has been. I would never say that it hasn't been. And so I think you can be pro-America and still say it's so evil that we're doing this. And I mean, I could list off 10 things I think that we're doing right now that's like that. So I think it's just I think it comes down to that and admitting that. And when I say those things, I just want to make sure that it doesn't come across like I'm saying none of those Christians are doing it, but I am. I'll be the first to admit we got to do better at this. So I don't know if that really helps
Right.
or if that's
I
what
think
you're
I
asking.
like
that's
that
why
you.
Maybe it is.
I think that's
Go
why,
ahead.
like, maybe because you're saying, like, here's some of the things that, like, America has done wrong and obviously is continuing to do wrong. And I think that's why, like, a lot of people might be a little, like, suspicious of when a person might say, like, let's make America great again, is like, what is the again? Like, what was the again that was great? Because a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
the things that we need to admit were sins and evil that America has done were those times when it was the again. So I think that's why a lot of people might get suspicious on that. And I'm just curious, like, maybe what your thoughts are on that, because clearly I think we're in
Mm.
agreement here. Like, America's done and still is doing a lot of horrible things. And so I think I'm just like, in my mind, I'm like, well, I don't really necessarily want to go back to an America where we were doing those evil things, like something like slavery. So I'm just curious, like, maybe what your thoughts are on,
Mm-hmm.
like, when people say, like, let's go back to when America was great. Like, well, when was the time where we weren't doing some
Yeah.
of these really evil things?
Yeah. Fantastic question. And I don't want to make it sound like, that we would all necessarily agree on what those evil things are. In other words, I'm not trying to misrepresent myself so that you like me.
Right.
We may disagree on some of
Yeah,
those.
totally.
Fine
Yeah,
with me.
absolutely.
And I also want to say I've never publicly supported
Totally.
Trump. I've never said make America great again, just
Yeah.
for the record. But yeah, my understanding of the MAGA movement. Actually, I don't want to speak for all of them, so I'll give you my personal opinion. What I think the sentiment means. I don't think it's choosing a date and saying, let's make America as if it's 1850 again, or 1780 again, or 1980 again. I think it's more saying, can we agree that the principles of America, 1776, say, can we agree that these principles are good? They are worth preserving. Now, what you have is, of course, the great oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting my name. Who was the slave that became a senator?
Hiram
Oh
Revels.
my gosh, no, I'm so annoyed. He's one of my favorite American heroes, and all of a sudden, I'll think of it in a second.
Oh,
I
you're
feel
fine.
embarrassed. He's one
No
of my
worries.
heroes. Forgot his name, like a moron. But like he said, and then MLK later said, it's these principles that demand that slavery ends. It's these principles that demand that everyone is treated equal. These are great principles. So when I think, let's make America great again, which is something I don't say,
Right.
by the way. But what I mean by that is, let's go back and agree that these principles are good, and let's preserve them. And that's where, for me personally, where I get things like freedom of speech, stop censoring people on social media, freedom of the press, stop saying that everything you disagree with is misinformation or disinformation.
Sure.
This unholy alliance that is happening between political parties and big tech, to do the bidding of the GOP or the DNC. Absolutely wrong. You end up getting into all sort of oligarchy and stuff like that. Freedom to chart your own course, and that is how I had kind of understood limited government, federalism. We're going to chart our own course, get the government out of my life, and respect other people's. When we talk about pursuit of happiness, we're really talking about you being able to chart your own course with your own business, private property. I think all those things are good. And so to me, it's not make America great again. Let's pretend it's 1788, 1776 again. It's let's preserve those things. And if we can do that, then I think that we could probably heal a whole lot of things. Not
Yeah.
everything. Let's don't be ridiculous and naive, but we might be able to heal some
Yeah.
things. That's my take.
I
on it
appreciate that
anyway.
you said that, because I think that those principles of America's founding are really the principles that allowed us to relieve ourselves of some of our sins, our national sins, including the original sin of slavery. And it's a continuous work in progress.
Absolutely.
So without those original founding principles that we all are willing to live by, I don't think we get there. I think that we devolve into something much worse than today. So,
I agree. I think we devolve into some sort of dictator or tyranny, or the equal horror, which is the other side, which is just complete anarchy. I mean, you can't have complete anarchy or you die. you can't have tyranny or you're a slave. So I agree with that principle philosophically.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, we think that you're a genuinely beautiful person, and we love you as an individual, and we love Skillet as an entity, and what you represent might not be fully in line with what Mason and I are totally in line with in the modern day, but we still respect you, and we're really, really happy to have had you on today. We know you have to get out of here, but we want to say thanks from the bottom of our hearts.
Yeah.
Likewise, I sure loved it. Thank you so much it was great to have a cordial chat.
Totally.
Where we're just discussing things. And I really appreciate you guys helping me promote the album as well. So likewise, and if we're coming near you, this time you can't miss the show. But
That's right, Mason.
Come out, have a good time, meet the band. And all you got to do is contact my people who set this up, and we'll have some fun, break bread, and
love it.
Sounds great.
Love it.
And
Love
rock.
it. And I appreciate, like, again, like, I know it can be maybe difficult to just like hop on a call with random strangers and then talk about some of these things that, mean so much to each one of us. And so, and especially when there's disagreement there. Right. But I just appreciate like your vulnerability to like at least be willing to do that. And so I just wanted to at least name that.
Oh, great. Very, very kind of you. Thank you so much, guys. Great to chat with you, bros. And keep rocking, man.